Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Sonic Ringbond writing stream for April 17th, 2022. I'm your host, Joshua Tarwater, and creator of the Sonic Ringbond, Sonic the Hedgehog AU. And allow me to say Happy Easter to everyone joining, whether you celebrate religiously, commercially, or if you celebrate the fertility goddess holiday that Easter has a tendency of blotting out on the calendar. Hope you enjoyed this Sunday. As is typically the case for me, I'll be writing on a Sunday morning. Where to begin today? Let's see here. Brain's kind of scattered all over the place, a little worn out from the week, and probably worn out from the lack of healthy human contact, but oh well. Let's see here. Listening to right now the main theme for Sonic Ringbond by Shimshan the Gadite. Was planning on listening to something else as I started the writing portion of today's stream, but I'm enjoying the main theme too much and it helps put me in the right mindset. Ultimately, while an adventure story, and meant to be a slow-paced one, which is why this theme works really well for it, it's a good theme to listen to as I start moving into a much slower section of the story. A lot to talk about when I get to that later today, but that's always in the second half of the stream. For now, we'll be starting the first half, where I sit down and write up the scene for today. Usually only about 8 pages long at the most. I try not to get that long if I can. Multiple reasons for that page length. Ultimately, though, gotta make sure I don't exceed 15,000 characters, because that's the character limit over on Tapas. As always, though, if you have any questions about the AU, the story, or just my thoughts on Sonic in general, you can leave me questions in the chat, and I'll be glad to respond. For now, though, I'm going to go ahead and dive right in. And don't mind if I take long pauses to put notes into story. I do structure it around the idea of making a video game design document. It's not really one, but I have all sorts of reasons for it that I've talked about in prior streams. But you're always welcome to ask about that, and I'm more than glad to repeat the information again. And now I'm going to go ahead and bring this up on my screen and go ahead and get right into it. And I see our first comment of the chat is going to be from a block today. Thought I might have had some conversation to respond to, but not this early in the stream, I suppose. Dissipate is just one of those words I always misspell. It's kind of funny, really. And I'm going to actually go ahead and mute the music now as I switch to a different song for my own listening. Unfortunately, without permissions, can't really go playing it on the air. Sorry about that. But if you want to know what I'm listening to, it's Happy Busy Day by Kotal Yamamoto off of the Seven Deadly Sins Cursed by Light original soundtrack. I listen on Spotify, so if you'd like to listen along, I'll go ahead and drop my... There we go. Playlist right into the chat. And I'm going to take a moment here to fill in some information. Mind me a second, gonna do some light research. And there we go, my little bit of research is complete. So, right back into the writing. And there we go. With that, I will wrap up this scene. Just got one little more note to drop in. Just need to make sure my cutscene numbers. And as I wrap at the beginning of the opening part of the stream, I'll be switching things to my 15 to 30 minute break I take every stream. As I go ahead and stretch, get a drink of water and all that stuff. And when I get back, I'll go ahead and prep the scene and talk about what my ideas were behind it. There we go. That takes care of my notes. Lots and lots and lots of notes today. And I'll just go ahead and take care of my music. Get that nice and ready for the break. Thank you again, everyone, for joining me so far. And hoping everybody will join me after the break. I will be back in a bit. As I said, my breaks are usually 15 to 30 minutes. And for those curious, there's Tempest himself. And Rosie. But we'll get to my ideas and everything when I get back after the break. Hope to see everyone then, and I'll be back in a bit. And welcome back, everybody. I'm your host, Josh Tarwater. For those just joining me, welcome to the Sonic Ringbond writing stream. I am the author and creator of the Sonic the Hedgehog AU, Sonic Ringbond. Good morning, Mecca from the 80s. To everybody waiting, sorry that was such a long break. Hope you're doing well this Easter morning, Mecca from the 80s, and everybody else in the audience. I got my little slideshow going on the side still. Just want to take a moment to talk about that here in a moment. Didn't mean for the long break though, but due to how late I was running, I had a bit of an errand to run. So, for those just joining, typically what I do in my streams is I break them into two parts. In the first part, I sit down and I write the story. The second part, I go back and proof it and talk about what my intentions were. As a result, there's a lot more talking in the second parts of the streams than the first parts. Though I do throughout the stream respond to the chat, which, as you can tell, this early in my streaming career, it's still a pretty empty chat. But I'm hoping to stick with Sonic Ringbond for quite some time. If I can stick with it for a couple of years, maybe the chat will get a bit busier. We'll see. For the moment, however, just want to go ahead and get right into things. This is going to be episode of Amnesia Island number 3, which is the 12th overall chapter. And today's scene is going to be focusing on Tempest the Black. Kind of gets split into a two-section scene, which I've been trying to avoid. But there was a lot to cover here, and not really enough to cover independently. And so there's a couple of characters who get a lot of focus this scene. Again, primarily Tempest. Though, as I look at my slideshow, I actually realized I need to add somebody in, because I didn't realize I was going to be using them. So let's see if I can just slip them in real quick. But I have used them now at this point in the story, so let's see if we can't drop them in. There we go. Let's give it a moment to see. And I'll go ahead and introduce everybody to the characters as we come across them. We have Tempest the Black, Rosie the Rascal, or my AU version of Amy Rose, the Remnant, who made an appearance this scene unexpectedly, Nana the Hand, who also gets introduced this scene, Molt the Fairy, who even though she was in prior streams, hasn't joined the story quite yet, Thorn the Crimson, who was in the last scene, alongside Pin Bowlings. And then the no image data found is to represent a character known as Brilliant the Projector. These is my cast of characters for the episode of Amnesia Island. And primarily I'll be focusing on Rosie and Tempest. The Remnant's appearance is a bit unexpected. Nana is a support character for Rosie and Tempest to bounce off of when not each other. And Moat is kind of my author tool. Whereas Thorn and Pin, as well as Brilliant, they are technically the antagonists for this particular episode. And thanks to a bit of listening to Sawano Hiroyuki music, I actually now have an idea of what I'll be doing across the entirety of this episode. I'm actually going to have to draw one more character for it. And that's going to be fun because to draw that character, I'm going to have to look up long-eared hedgehogs. Because that's what the character is. But you won't see them on the Rosie and Tempest side of things. They will be on the Well, I can't really do my research on that right now. Having internet problems, which I'm really hoping aren't going to interrupt my stream. Things seem to be going alright for the moment. So I will go ahead and just focus on the stream. Mecca from the 80s, if you're still in the chat, could you let me know if you still hear me? Or let me know if the chat is live still. I look forward to any help I can get boosting things. But glad to know that you're still in the chat. So, now that I'm kind of done rambling, let's go ahead and get into today's scene. For regular viewers, they'll know by now a bit of the format of how I write, which will include my opening paragraph, which helps set the idea of the scene. And over here in my notes, I keep track of what music I was listening to when I was writing certain scenes and certain parts of the scenes. Right now, and I have permission to play this on the air, I am listening to... Oh, and I left everyone in silence during the break again. I keep doing that. I'm listening to right now... I need to turn off the character slideshow. I'm listening to right now the Sonic Ringbond main theme by Shimshon the Gadite over on Twitter. I recommend everybody check him out if they get the chance. Great composer, love most of his works. Was very happy with this when he presented it to me. Only thing I had to ask for out of the whole thing was to go ahead and add a little loop to it. Unfortunately, I play using Spotify, and I don't have my settings right for it to loop very well. That's why you get that little break that you hear. Anyways, though, so with my opening paragraphs, what I typically do is I will go through here and I will present an idea which I use to carry through the scene. It's not always accurate, and I don't always follow through. It's part of the problem with the way that I write, which is pretty much I make it up as I go along. And while I had an idea for this scene, which if you were here at the very beginning, you would have saw the stream summary, and how it showed that I was going to be talking about Tempest, him accepting the name that he's given, and talking with Nana, but I take a little bit to get to that part, and I don't actually get far enough along to introduce Rosie to Tempest in this scene. Instead, I present the idea that he's going to go out and find her. Part of the reason I decided to make this shift is despite the fact that for the longest time I had it in my mind to have him and Rosie leave Nana's house together for this first introduction to Amnesia Island, I actually went ahead and decided against that because that would really shorten how long that Rosie's out for and kind of take away from the idea that at this point in the story, despite the idea of Amy being turned into Rosie for my AU, is to explore the idea of what if Amy ended up with Sonic Speed and Moveset instead of the Pico Pico Hammer. I need to give her more time at this point of the story, so that way it's known that she does not start with Sonic Speed. I will be giving that to her in a bit. She will have it before the end of this episode, suffice to say. I can't say how many chapters into the episode it will be, because over the course of this episode I will need to check in with my antagonist as well on certain occasions. And so it's kind of interesting because I'm also trying to balance the idea of telling a story, but also fitting a narrative around a gameplay idea. And so I end up with this situation to where I don't really follow through with a lot of the ideas I went into this scene with. but I do still play around with the idea of memories. And you may remember this from prior scenes if you've been following for a while, where I was talking about memories and desires, and how both are dreams. Dreams of the past, dreams of the future. And so I kind of play into that again with this scene. It's a fun little parallel, especially since that's how I kind of started things with Sonic when I joined him in the prior episode of New History. But Sonic's storyline will be going in a different direction from Tempest's storyline. Though all the storylines of the three characters, Sonic, Tempest, and Rosie, are meant to intertwine with each other as the story carries forward. So just give me a second to read through the scene's opening paragraph and see if there's anything that I'm missing in it. Okay, first off, memories. This very first sentence here. Yes, to a lot of people, memories are the soul. Without memories, there is no soul. And that's an interesting perspective on it. And so I'm kind of playing with that idea as I progress into this scene. And so you see how I present different ideas to this philosophy and how it can affect the story. It also kind of reflects onto Rosie in the fact that if you're used to Amy's character with the Pico Pico hammer, especially if a lot of your imagery of her is painted from either the Archie comics or pretty much after she gets uses the Ring of Acorns to age up in the Archie comics, or you're very used to her from Sonic X, and that carries forward into a lot of your imagery of the character. And even IDW kind of touches on it to a bit. There is a certain expectation that comes from Amy's character to be a master wielder of the Pico Pico hammer, an unmatched warrior who just happens to have a thing for Sonic and acting girly and cute, but she's got a terrifying temper. You may even be familiar with her from Sonic Boom, where it's very similar, but she also plays heavily into the Team Mom role, totally foregoing being allowed to be in on the fun herself. Well, all these things are very different from who Amy originally was. Originally, and Tyson Hess writes her this way. You'll see it in the Sonic Mania Adventures episode 6 short, and you will see it in the Team Sonic Racing Overdrive episode 1 short. And you'll see a very different Amy from the hammer-wielding warrioress. And this Amy is bubbly, energetic, cheerful, optimistic. She's got more energy than she knows what to do with it. She has fun, she's competitive, she teases people all around her, and she drops everything to help others around her without giving up the idea that she can still have fun and that the people she's helping can have fun. And she always goes at everything with 100% to the 10th power. And this is because she has a Genki Girl foundation, which pretty much got chopped out from underneath her, leaving her as kind of a flailing ball of traits that has been pretty much like a ball of Play-Doh. And various writers just shape her into being whatever they want her to be at any given time, and this comes from her lack of a foundation. So where I write is the idea of going back to this foundation and building it up through her character structure, which, personality-wise, if not for her girliness, childishness, and her tendency to tease people, get into and cause trouble in search of fun for herself and others around her, she's pretty much got Sonic's character structure. Except it's shaped by these certain filters, as well as that Genki Girl foundation. And so the idea of a new soul birth into an old body, well, that's kind of hinting at the ideas of thoughts that I'm having. It's kind of a bit of a spoiler here, misdirection. It's more so what this is implying in my story, that things aren't always what they appear to be. And hence the idea of a dream, where things are constantly shifting, never what you think they are, and you can't really pin it down as reality. And so as I move forward a bit more, I start to talk about, what happens if your first memory's not a memory, but a dream? What does that mean? Where does it shape? And so I start to tie into things that I've mentioned before in these opening paragraphs on both Rosie's part and Sonic's part, talking about memories, dreams, destiny, and even the idea that life itself is a dream, one we wake to again and again. And present the idea of who we are is not only dependent on what we've gained, but also what we've lost. And with that, it wraps up this first paragraph. And so there was a lot of symbolism and thought really put into this opening paragraph this time around. Because really it is questioning who a person is. And it's probably a bit heavy really for the scene, since really it's just supposed to meant to focus on Tempest and the fact that for him and his amnesia, the only thing in his head, aside from general knowledge that he has, is a dream. And so let's go ahead and scroll down into the rest of the scene here. And I'm going to go ahead and shift this a little bit. It works better this way in my opinion. And so my writing style, of course, I start a scene with a series of quick descriptive sentences to just kind of give people an idea that their own imagination is able to wrap around. Because even though I have a picture in my own head, I prefer letting the reader's imagination shape things from their own experiences and thoughts. I just feel it's a lot more fun that way. And so in this case, it's also something I'll use to talk about artificial things. I try to avoid describing characters too much in these parts, because when I do so, I make them feel artificial. You'll see that I do it on occasion, and when I do, there are reasons for it. Sometimes it's just because it better sets the scene. Other times there is symbolism involved with it. And so you'll see that the first 3 lines that I use here are actually all describing Tempest's arm. He has this arm of darkness, and the fingertips are crystal, and they're giving off a gentle blue light. And the fact that that's in this part is implying it's something artificial. It's something which shouldn't be. It's a hint that I leave in my narrative to go, pay attention to this, something isn't quite what it appears. I won't typically tell you what is off, why it's off, or what's wrong. Though in this case I would think that most people wouldn't really have a hard time believing an arm of pure darkness that reflects absolutely no light, so it just looks like a hole in the world. I would think most people would agree that that's a little off. And we got our second bot in the chat now. Well, I'm more than glad that bots want to sell me followers. I'm not looking for bots to sell me more bots to follow. Bit of artificial inflation there. I would rather have people who come in, watch, partake in what I have to say, and engage in the chat in general, who are actually interested in reading my work. and hearing my thoughts on the Sonic the Hedgehog franchise. They're quite a bit different from most thoughts on it, and a lot of it is rooted more so in creator word and the Japanese side of things, even though there's a lot missing. Most of what I know is, again, creator interviews, translated creator interviews, and translations from the various Japanese game manuals. So it's not an accurate picture of Sonic's world that I write from, but it is still going to be rooted in that, and you won't find a lot of Western influence on my story. You'll find stuff here or there, which will come in time, but if you're used to things like Aibo Robotnik, or Kintobor, or stuff like that, you won't find that in my work. The name Robotnik in general, I probably won't use except maybe in character profiles for Gerald and Maria. And yeah, that's a bit of a spoiler, those two are going to show up in the story eventually. I won't say when because, again, that would be a spoiler, and it kind of breaks the flow that I'm going with. Which maybe you've noticed, but it's this episode of Amnesia Island, and we're currently in Lost Palm Zone. The idea to the way that I'm telling the story on a whole is that I want to keep it as slow-paced as I can, while also keeping it kind of a slice-of-life adventure. The lives of these characters are traveling from adventure to adventure, and so they're going to meet a lot of people, and they're going to meet a lot of people shaped by other people. And so it's just kind of going to be a really slow-paced road trip story, with some major plot points going on. If you've been here from the beginning, you know I have a deity as my AU's primary antagonist. Eggman's running around trying to figure out something going on in the world. And I've also now introduced the Empire, and whatever it is that they're currently up to. And so I have a overall plot which will be followed, but for the most part, the idea is more so to take an episode and go, okay, this episode takes place in this location, and this is the story that unfolds while they're in this location. And so, that idea keeps the story small, but it allows me to expand Sonic's world indefinitely as I introduce more and more concepts such as the rings, additional antagonists, outright villains, and forces beyond Eggman. You just grow Sonic's world through characters other than Sonic. And Sonic himself, well, I'm going to try to keep him as static as I can. In truth, I'm going to try to keep Amy as static as I can, even though Rosie is an exploration of her character in a different developmental route. The reason I want to aim for a static effect on the two is I do root my ideas in canon, and Sonic is a static character. He travels, enters the lives of other people, his adventure affects their life, affects their problems, and sometimes solves their problems, sometimes leaves them accepting of their problems, and then he moves on, having changed their life, while he himself hasn't changed. And that's kind of how his static arc works, and it's why a road trip story works really well for him. It's going to be interesting to do that with Rosie as well, because she's going to be bouncing off of Tempest, who is, as a character, a much more dynamic arc character, as, while I haven't introduced it yet, Rosie isn't really bothered by her own amnesia. It's there, and it kind of sits wrong with her, and she feels bad for the people who may have known her, which, due to the nature of how things are going, it's pretty much nobody but Sonic. And that may seem strange to people who have been following the games or other parts of the IP, But if you've watched all my streams, including the now 2 delisted streams, I went ahead and privated those videos because there's a lot of things which will be better explained at later parts of the story, because it adds more weight to when those aspects are revealed. There was information in there where it did explain what was going on and why there will be nobody who knows her. As I said, the idea is to give her a fresh start. And as I move on to the idea of a fresh start, that takes us to this next paragraph. Give me just a second to read it. Okay, so nothing I really want to correct there, but plenty to talk about. And so, this little one's more of a philosophy, kind of, which fits Sonic. Sonic has a lot of philosophies. But again, a bit of what I was just talking about is in this paragraph. Such as beginnings and opportunities, chances to start anew and give things another shot. And so, even though Rosie herself doesn't show up in this scene, she gets a lot of mention. The idea of Amnesia Island, forgetting things, these are still carrying over from the prior scene. And so you get this idea, or at least the idea I'm trying to sell, is that yes, we're starting over. I was really heavy on that with the prior episode with Sonic, and the idea of starting over. Even if you thought you knew everything, you can start over and tell a new story. And again, I also sell that idea with the very opening scene with my primary AU antagonist, Benedict Yodoku, and him talking about his greatest creation is a ring which can rewrite the memories of the world, and that with it, the world could technically be saved. So a lot of heavy commentary here and there on a whole on the Sonic AU that I'm telling, and the shaping of Sonic's world. And if one thinks maybe I'm being a bit heavy-handed on it, another way to look at it is the Sonic franchise ever since Sonic Heroes pretty much is where it started, but Sonic Heroes kind of avoided it because it was still riding the coattails of Sonic Adventure 2, which is the last Sonic game ever made by Sega, while Sega still made their own consoles, when they were first party, not third party. And so Heroes is a bit of a soft reboot, both in series imagery and character relationships. For example, if you're a big fan of the idea of Sonic, Tails, and Knuckles being a trio, such as from the imagery of the 90s, the three of them together, even though that only happens twice before Sonic Adventure, even though there are other instances where Knuckles does work together with Sonic, you can also find multiple canons on the Japanese side which are taking place at the same time. The handhelds kind of had their own canon, the console games had their own canon, the spin-off games had their own canon, and it was very interesting, kind of all over the place stuff. One of the big things, and a bit of a spoiler for the Sonic movie, is that in the Sonic and Tails games, which is Sonic and Tails 1, Sonic and Tails 2, better known in the West as, what is the first one called? Sonic Chaos and Sonic Triple Trouble. On the Japanese side of those manuals, Sonic lives on South Island, and he is the guardian of the Chaos Emeralds. In Sonic G, same scenario, he lives on South Island, guardian of the Chaos Emeralds, but Knuckles is also guardian of the Chaos Emeralds, and so the two of them are actually working together in that game to stop Eggman. Pardon me. And so that's a really interesting aspect of the franchise. It was kind of cool to see it adapted into the second Sonic movie. Now mind, don't take compliments from me for the second Sonic movie to necessarily be high praise, because I'm actually very critical of the movie, and I'm not fond of movie Sonic. Very much do not like his character type. But on the flip side, having seen his character now in 2 movies, I think it would be disrespectful to his character to ever actually make him anything like Game Sonic. His entire character development, motivations, and maturity route clash with the immaturity and selfishness of Game Sonic. And so to take him off of his development cycle and negatively change him, I feel would be very disrespectful in what's been done with him. Don't like him, but I still think it's important to respect the character and who he is and who he's becoming. Now, of course, conversely, that may make people ask, but you're writing a whole AU with the idea of making Amy a completely different character. And that's the point to an AU. I feel the version of Amy I love most got lost over time. From the introduction of the very nasty temper in Sonic X, to just throwing out her character after Sonic and the Black Knight, to her being the competent leader and practically turning into what I was jokingly calling Amy Acorn. If the joke doesn't make sense for you, it's because typically over on the Sega of America side, you had the Archie comics, and where Amy is the IP's lead female character, in the Archie comics, the lead female is a character called Sally Acorn, and her role is a leader of a large group of people who routinely fight Eggman. So, IDW leaning heavily into that direction with Amy early on, especially during the Metal Zombie arc, where pretty much all traces of Amy's character were completely erased, it became very easy for me to start calling her Amy Acorn during those parts. There's actually a part before that in the Battle for Angel Island, where they're squaring off against Neo Metal Sonic, where somebody took a scene of a battle strategy being laid out, and it's being laid out by Amy of all characters. They took this scene and edited it to replace Amy with Sally Acorn. It made no difference to the scene and felt 100% natural even being Sally instead of Amy. And it's not really a lot of surprise because a lot of what was going on here and what it was leading into, the storylines Ian Flynn was writing early on, was going into the idea of the Metal Virus arc being the big issue 300 milestone story arc for the Archie comics. Except the Archie comics are rather unceremoniously cancelled before then, and the story got carried over instead into the IDW comics. And throughout a lot of it, Amy's playing the role of Sally. Now, that's not to say that Amy's role doesn't show up at some point in the story. It actually does, except it's not played by Amy. Amy's role is actually played by newcomer Tangle the Lemur, and she plays it to a T with barely any of her own character and character uniqueness coming through. And so I'm fairly positive the original Archie idea, where Tangle gets turned into a Zombot, I'm fairly positive that would have been Amy turning into a Zombot. But her continued faith and belief in Sonic would have really hit him hard, as you see it happen with Tangle, except Tangle's faith and belief in Sonic really doesn't make a lot of sense, because she doesn't know him to the degree that Amy does. She hasn't been on all these adventures. To her, it's just yeah, whatever, you're Sonic the Hedgehog, everybody's heard of you, you're the hero of the world. And to me, it felt a bit dishonest. But that's the problem when you're trying to run a story and not working with who the characters are. And so, in my case, the idea of using Amy, her original nickname of Rosie the Rascal, to specifically separate her and explore her character built up through her foundation and similarities to Sonic, but without the Pico Pico hammer and the narrative changes that brings, it justifies a whole AU just to literally explore Amy. But even in addition to Amy, my AU strives to make the rings a more regular part of the AU of Sonic's world, and not just a gameplay mechanic or a strange power-up. I would rather match their game rules to the actual storytelling, but also use them to explain strange phenomena in the world. And I will continue to do that over the course of telling the story. Where the story is right now, though, is literally just introducing Tempest. And I would argue he doesn't have a lot of character at this point. I know who his character inspirations are. One, a lot of people won't see it because, unlike myself, they're actually familiar with the material. That is actually Sora, or Sora, as most of Westerners probably know him as. I prefer going with the Japanese pronunciation because Sora literally means sky. And his other major character inspiration is Gran from Grand Blue Fantasy. And those are kind of the inspirations for his character. But because of who he is, which is a major plot point, which I won't reveal the secrets of now, he's also a very timid, awkward, and unusual character who has difficulties with simple things sometimes. And it's not that these are things that he can't overcome, it's just because of who he is, there are things he lingers on, his mind latches onto him and won't let go, and it makes him uncomfortable. And the sense of discomfort that he has is a persistent driver of his character and some of his more impulsive actions. Ultimately, though, he pretty much will be playing the role of a suitor to Amy. He's gonna fall for her hard. And he's gonna fall for her as hard as she fell for Sonic. And it's going to be interesting to play around with that, because a lot of the idea to his character's use is, while he personally doesn't like Sonic and is kind of jealous of Sonic and Amy's infatuation with him, which again, that's going to be stuff that builds up later. And the fact that I kind of designed him for him to be shipped with Amy, even though in my AU she is 100% loyal to Sonic, because it is a Son-Amy AU, he is still technically a pro-Son-Amy character from an out-of-universe standpoint. The idea that his character is to explore a lot of how Amy and her interest in the romantic side of her attraction to Sonic is played out. She has very romantic over-the-top daydreams, but her actual interactions with Sonic don't necessarily play to those types of strengths and ideas, and even her responses to Sonic replying in just the smallest of ways is way too big in comparison to her daydreams. And these are things I want to address and use Tempest's character for as a way to explore how does Amy actually see Sonic. A lot of people think she sees him solely through the daydreams, and they ignore her actual interactions with Sonic, going, but this is what she's daydreaming about. And I feel that's kind of a dishonest treatment of Amy's character. It's one thing to daydream, but to live as if you're daydreaming, even for as rosy a character of her, it's a bit underselling a character, like ignoring the nuance of people. And so again, that's going to be Tempest's main purpose of the story, is to push the exploration of Amy's loyalty to Sonic, her love for Sonic, the difference between her fluffy daydreams and how much she's actually willing to sacrifice for Sonic, no less how important even the smallest return of her affection is to her. But that means that I have to introduce Tempest first. I have to build him from the blank slate that he starts off into this character inspired by Sora, inspired by Goron, and with his own strong sense of justice, and inspired by what he's supposed to be as a character, and who his actual identity is pre the starting point for him. And so one of the things that I kind of want to talk on is I was actually thinking about it the other day, and because it has to do with plot points later on. But one of the interesting things about Tempest is he kind of has a theme of 5 for his crystal count. And it's kind of a thing all over him. I just want people to be aware of that and to keep it in mind later. But also the way that I describe his arm is pure darkness to the point that it looks like a hole in reality. I kind of want people to keep that in mind too, as if there's something missing from him, something very important which makes him whole. And I just want people to keep that in mind. And so that's what this paragraph kind of does. It's just taking the time, as this particular episode is a really, really descriptive episode. And so just taking the time here to describe him and try to tie into the ideas that I have going on. And so this pure darkness, this hole in reality, but then he's also got a normal arm on the other side. But there's still plenty of things which are weird with them. And so as I go into this paragraph, I go heavily into the ideas, and I'm kind of not reading this like I should be right now, but I'm on a bit of a time limit. I'm going to kind of speed through this scene because I don't have a lot of time this morning, unfortunately. So bear with me, please. We may not even get to the stuff with Nana in today's stream. But I'm going to try to get there, so bear with me, please. But with this paragraph, I take the time to again bring a lot of attention to the crystals. And one of the big things I want people to pay attention to, and I'm not going to start tying back and giving an idea of what I'm tying back to, but I've described a lot of already what to keep in mind up to this point in the story. And so it should be very noticeable to say, thrust through him from behind, yet he's alive and he's in no pain. This description of his relationship with the crystals should really be paid attention to. And I just want people again to just kind of hold on to those ideas. And now I finally let him talk, and I introduce the idea that he's a youthful character. And I also start to introduce a new concept here now, which is that the light that his crystals give off change colors based off what he's feeling. And so I go ahead and I actually write that into the story now. Because to me, I think that's actually a very important thing. And it's kind of a way to also say he can't hide who he is. The crystals are always going to be giving away his emotions. He is literally incapable of hiding what he's feeling. He is 100% an open book emotionally, and that is in stark contrast to Sonic, who is very much a closed book under lock and key of his emotions. And I want him to have the strong contrast with Sonic, where Sonic is strong, highly confident, Tempest is very wary, but still has a willingness to act. He will not hold back because it goes against who he is, even if he's wary. And so this is where it's going to lead to the impulsiveness that I'm going to be feeding into his character, is even though there is doubt and wariness, he still goes at it headlong. And these are kind of important and necessary traits for him to have, so he can be a suitor to Amy. It's impossible for him to be a suitor to Amy without that impulsiveness and willingness to act on what he's feeling. And as such, his feelings cannot be ever hidden, not from anyone, not from himself, not from people around him in-universe, not from the reader. It's always going to be as obvious as I can make it what he's feeling. And that's one of the reasons that even as I try to show his confusion, I still take the time to tell his confusion in the following paragraph. And it's also a transition point to both take the discomfort and ill ease he's at to make him close his eyes and try to center himself. And this allows me now to go into that idea of a dream, like I was talking about back at the beginning of this particular chapter. And it's also here that I take the time to introduce the remnant into the story again. And now this should start to make people think about who is Tempest. If you've been following things for a while, then you will know that Sonic's dream at the beginning is of himself seeing the remnant. And now we also know that Tempest has a dream of seeing the remnant. And I haven't gotten to it yet with Rosie, but that is going to be where her memories start, as Rosie, rather than Amy, is going to be with the remnant, except where Tempest and Sonic remember seeing her, she remembers being the remnant, and it's going to make her very uncomfortable. And it's an aspect I want to play with is Amy's own insecurities. Is by highlighting her own insecurities and weaknesses, I'm going to be able to show the strength of her foundation and how her energy is a good thing for her character, even if a lot of people find it annoying or even unrealistic. And so she knows, unlike a lot of people, well, unlike, say, Nana and Tempest, she's aware of being someone before she was here. And that's because as the remnant, there's still something that she was holding on to. And she clearly remembers Sonic. She can recall Sonic talking to her. She can recall his face. She can recall his aura. She knows she was part of his life, but she remembers none of herself in it. And she doesn't remember anything that was really going on around Sonic. It's all just a remnant. And now, this is where she is again. Instead of being this remnant of liquid shadow, she's a person again, and she's got to try to rebuild who she is and understand how she ended up here. And this was covered in the prior scene when she's giving her narration on Destiny, Fate, and Amnesia Island being a place where those who challenged the gods ended up. Now, some more interesting things on Tempest having the dream of the remnant versus Sonic having the dream of the remnant. Sonic recognizes it as an event that could have and should have happened. However, for Sonic, he has no memory of Amy ever ending up in that state. There is literally no connecting events for him to what he last remembers Amy as, which is left undefined in the story because it's always going to be based off whatever Sega's most recent Sonic game is. And so, that is unless, of course, crazy pipe dream happens, Sega adopts my work, and they make the transition into it, which would be the Sonic World Wall storyline. It's literally a storyline I have titled in place with literally just Sega to go, okay, we're gonna introduce Ring Bond. kooky, crazy, impossible pipe dreams, but I still structure it like that so I can constantly keep my story malleable and my world malleable. So as a result, whatever the most recent Sonic game is, Sonic's memory of Amy there is going to be what he remembers Amy as. And so, seeing the remnant, no less during the ending events of Sonic 2, it's bizarre to him because he can't figure out how Amy goes from whatever her last game appearance was to this. Now, though, here we have Tempest looking at his dream, and he sees her, and he sees himself reaching for her, struggling to get to her. And to him, this dream is the only memory he has of who he was before Amnesia Island. And for those who have been following for a while, he's obviously not Sonic. Sonic is running around. Last we saw of him, he was on the tornado, flying through the sky, looking at the Sky Ring. Or the Ring of Memories, as Yodoku calls it. And while he was doing that, Tempest washed up here on Amnesia Island. And so it's very much worth noting that they're both running around at the same time, so Tempest cannot be Sonic. So, there's more to that, but I can't go into too many details on it. I'm just shooting it down now that Tempest existing does not cut Sonic out from running around the world. You can't draw that connection. Sorry. Why he dreams of reaching for the remnant is a different story. It's very different from the Supersonic scene of Supersonic reaching for the remnant. And I just want people to know that. But mind you, as confusing as that all is, he was going to kind of agree that nothing's helping with that dream right now. And I need to change that. Not whole topped. Just going to make that a bit more grammatically correct. And now you're going to also see me introduce red electricity inside the crystals. That's just talking about intensity and what direction his unstable emotions are leaning. It's leaning more so in violent and very negative emotions, but still in confusion. And so pretty much what you're going to see with his emotions is blue, he's calm, at peace, having fun, feeling good, those types of emotions. Purple, he's going into a realm of instability, confusion, emotions that make it hard to think, such as fear, panic, worry. His thoughts are not clear. And though not introduced here beyond the red-colored sparks, if his crystals are glowing red, he's openly jealous. He's angry, violent emotions, envious, feeling hateful, full of wrath and anger, rage. Then you'll see that introduced later on. Right now, though, it's panic, and panic generates a fight-or-flight response. Fight being, again, that red energy, and hence the red sparks. I also take this time, as I say, this is a very descriptive scene, to really lead into the idea of introducing how his arm works. And again, as I said, it's a very descriptive scene. And I just take the time these next two paragraphs to really describe it. And show him really invested in understanding his arm. He's panicked, but he's got a curiosity. And so as I move past that, the idea is just to shift into again showing his lack of confidence, lack of belief. If he's confused, he doesn't understand, he's a little overwhelmed. And I'm going to go ahead and cut the music now, because as I move to this next part of the scene, I will naturally be switching the music to whatever I'm listening to. The link is still in the chat to my Spotify playlist, and this will now be... I don't believe I actually put it in. I did not. I was supposed to put it in right here. Which is what music I'm listening to. It's going to be Happy Busy Day by Koto Yamamoto off of the Seven Deadly Sins Cursed by Light original soundtrack. I just need to drop that note in. And I'm just leaving it as pretty much the theme for Nana's Home. Let me just make sure I spelled the title right. Not sure why Yamamoto song's name is in all capital letters, but we'll roll with it. And so now, as I said before, a lot of this is gameplay idea as well. And so I take the time now to just pretty much describe from exploring Nada's home. And this really messy girl's room. A lot of people say, but Amy's very neat. She's very organized. She's not cluttered at all. I 100% agree. I cover that a little later in the scene. A lot of this messy behavior in her own room is actually inspired by the writer Cute Girl Myra on Tumblr. A very, very good fiction writer. The story in question that inspires this more messy room is, oh, well, what's it called? Instincts, I believe, is the story. And so there's a bit of inspiration from that here, and I really hope she doesn't mind, because it's more of a small little thing. I don't want to play heavily into that too much, just kind of a little tribute there, as she's the one who really helped me kick off the idea of writing stories for my AU, and while I don't follow that story at all, it's kind of like a lot of my other prior works in the AU, now wiped away behind the big reset which this AU builds from. It is still hugely inspiring, and Kyuko Myra in a whole is an inspiring author to me. So, just getting a nice little tribute in the story from her. I thought was nice. It's also just a chance to really make Tempest embarrassed. And now I get the time to finally introduce Nana to the scene as well. And tremendous amount of time describing the kitchen. I try to avoid doing that. Except there was no reason to, again, follow the scene setting that I do up here. And while the kitchen's important to the scene and this needs described, it's not story shaping, so to say. And so I just kind of... sorry about that. My throat's really kind of scratchy this morning. And so I just really want to take the time to describe Nana and her home in a bit more detail. And then I go on and I let her babble away. Both because it allows me to make her a friendly, chattery old woman, but also because it was a nice way to just squeeze in a little bit of information I wanted to squeeze in. And now a point that I wanted to make sure I get with Tempest is that he's polite. You'll notice that he calls Nana ma'am here. And I have that change later, but I do allow Nana to notice and pay attention to it. And it also quick description of how Rosie ended up here on the island, why she's being called Rosie instead of Amy. And so you just see little things like that around here, and introducing the idea that she's a troublemaker. She's a rascal, but she's also cheerful, kind, full of energy. Just a quick description to again set the idea for her character. So Tempest is in a similar scenario, of course, with no memories, and so it's at this point, as he hears Rosie's name, he accepts calling himself Tempest the Black. That's when you see him make the name his own. And you also see him introduce a bit more of his own personality when I have not asked him, but why drop Hedgehog? The whole idea that him finding it kind of long. And between that, I also squeeze in, as she's putting some tea on, that Amnesia Island now claims its third victim that she's met. I'm tempted to just change that to that I know, since she can't really not know herself. You can't really meet yourself, especially when you have amnesia. And so I just kind of have her kind of scattered brain. She's jumping this way, that way, and showing a bit of her house. Again, part of the idea is that I'm trying to give Tempest something to bounce off of to introduce his character, and I'm also approaching a gameplay narrative aspect. And so I also need to finally start building the world. Up to this point, we've only seen Tails and we've seen Eggman. And I guess we've seen the Empire, but I've yet to really establish what is the technology level that the world is at this time. And so I now bring up the mention of electricity. and a simple AM/FM radio, which was listed back up above, which is obviously electricity powered. And so I'm presenting the idea of a simpler time. And I also again take the note to not show that Tempest is polite, but that he's also kind. And this simple task of helping her is something he's enthusiastic to lend his hand with. But again, I only have so much space that I have in these scenes. And now I take the time to show that Nana has been introduced to the idea of Tempest using his arm. But again, I'm running out of time for this, or running out of room for my scene. I need to also shift to the idea of Tempest being an adventurer. And it's also a chance to seed in that Amy's an adventurer. And now she draws that comparison, and not just color, as in the physical color, which is identical between the two. Reasons for that in the plot, I'll reveal later. But they have eyes colored by a yearning for adventure. And this is me again going back to, as I said, the root of Amy's character. She is designed as a character to follow Sonic on all his adventures. And she has to have a personality to never be discouraged by the fact that he never looks back at her, but to also stay cheerful and optimistic and partake in his adventures. This tells us, including her original bio from Sonic CD and her opening cutscene from Sonic Adventure, that she craves adventure herself. She is an adventurer, and that she gets bored if she's left standing around for too long. And so I introduced that idea again of Amy being an adventurer at this point. As I said, Tempest's primary role is to allow me to have a character to bounce off of for Rosie for the studying of Amy's character. And even though she's not even present in this scene, I'm able to tell a lot about her to allow for the build-up to show it with her by creating expectations in Tempest's character. And as I said, you now get this sense of time passing between them because he's not calling her ma'am now. He's now referring to her as Nana. And so even though it hasn't been a very long amount of time, she brings about an air of comfort around her. That's Nana's primary thing, is to be a very comfortable character to be around. That's literally part of why I call her Nana. The reason I present her as a gardener is because Nana's got meanings all over the world for what it means. It can be derivative of the term grandmother, or it can be derivative of one's own mother. It can refer to spring, it can refer to flowers, all sorts of different meanings across the globe for the name Nana. But generally, I really wanted to paint them onto a older motherly figure. And now I also point to another fun thing about Amy, is that she's a bit of a treasure hunter herself, an adventurer, and even in a place like Amnesia Island, she's still trying to satiate her need for adventure. And I also use this push now for adventure, adventure, adventure to pretty much wrap up the scene. And again, this whole paragraph here, we're all mentioning that mess that is Rosie's room again. That's my little bit of tribute to cute girl Myra and an idea she has in her story, Instincts. Very enjoyable story. Pure Son Amy, lot of sass. For those who aren't familiar with sass, it's Sonic, Amy, Shadow, Silver. And she does play with the idea of a romance of Son Amy, Shade Amy, and Silver Amy. Very fun story. I highly recommend it to anybody. I'm still waiting for her to get to season 2. But as I said, the idea is to push for the idea of adventure, adventure, adventure. And to wrap up the scene, and so I let Nana open the door to adventure. And on the gameplay note side of things, that wraps up the scene and goes back into player control. Whereas the rest of the scene wrapping up is again I'm going to the idea of memories and desire, memories being dreams of the past, desires dreams of the future. Again, that's referencing back to stuff that I did with Sonic earlier. And now I bring in an aspect of Tempest's character which is still a part of him despite this amnesia, his yearning for the open road and the world beneath the sky. But I also show that he's haunted by this dream, this girl he can't reach. And so he's going to try to address this dream right now and his need to adventure just by going out to find Rosie. And that's where this scene wraps up. And with Tempest indeed ready to go find Rosie. And on the gameplay side, if I was to ever get anybody to convert this into a game, it's when you really get now your first real playable section of the game with Tempest. And with that, as I said, the scene's wrapped up. And so if anybody has any questions or thoughts, feel free to share them while I go ahead and run my editor. It should have a few complaints, not too many this time around though. I'll never understand why it wants that to be clears. And it doesn't like me using unclear statements. I like using unclear statements because unclear statements really show that people really do think, so to say. They experience. They're not 100% confident. Which really plays into the inhabitants of Amnesia Island. There we go. That wraps up that. And with that wrapped up, it also means that I am done with the scene today. Was able to get through it in a more timely manner than I expected to. Which is a huge relief, since I do have other errands that need my attention this morning. With that being the case, though, I'll be bringing up the next stream window, and unlike at break, bringing back the main theme to wrap up today's stream. Thank you very much, everyone, for joining me. Really appreciate having you here, and I hope you had a good time. I will be back, as the stream says, tomorrow at 9 a.m. Greenwich Mean Time. Until then, though, thank you again for joining me, and stay well.